Okay, good. So our program today is Neil Cass from the Hopkinton Club. And he's going to be talking about, you'll recall last year that I introduced the idea of the flag subscription fundraiser program, which came out of the president-elect efforts. I'd heard them talk about it and rave about it. And Neil has been a member of his club for 11 years. He lives in Hancock with his wife, Lexi. They have 2 children, Josh, who's a home inspector, and Rachel, who is in Ithaca College. He's a member of the club for 10 years. I think I said that. He worked on the flags over Hopkinton from the beginning in 2012, and he's been the project coordinator since 2015. And I know he's made presentations to other clubs that have interest in this. He's also the head chef for the annual holiday senior luncheon that they put on. And he's vice president-elect in July. Neil, if you're ready, you can take over the meeting.
I am ready. Thank you so much for having me. Oh, good. I can even share. I have gone to other clubs, but never had a PowerPoint. So this is the first. So I'd love your feedback after. And hopefully, can you see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. So basically, Flags Over Hopkinton was started 12 years ago. The then president called a bunch of us to his kitchen table and said, "Oh, this is a great idea. We'll put flags up." And this club in Arizona had done it. And to be honest, I really thought he was kind of crazy for even doing this. In Arizona, they have nice square blocks and very easy to do. And of course, Hopkinton, like Brattleboro, is spread out, and there are neighborhoods, but some people are spread way out. But we started it. And what we do is we place flags at people's homes on 5 holidays: Memorial Day, Flag Day, Independence Day, Labor Day, Veterans Day. We charge a yearly subscription of $40. I have to say, every club I've talked to that has started this charges $50. Our club has started at $40 and we've stayed there. Generally, flags, most holidays are on Monday. The flags go up, so they're up a few days before and a few days after. We began in 2012, and I looked back in our first year, we had 76 flags with 4 routes, and our Interact Club did the pickup. That became hard to do because their schedules were so crazy. So that was the only year they did that. In 2020, we actually had 440 flags out every holiday. We have 22 routes where we put them out. And as you can see through the years, how we grew slowly. In 2015, though, it was Hopkinton's 250th anniversary. So our goal was to have 250 flags out for that. And we made that goal. And that really was a year we did a big push. There also is a big increase in 2020. It seemed like COVID, people really wanted to have something that was regular and normal. So we had a pretty big jump in 2020. Customers are billed in the spring for the coming year. The routes are created. That was my first job, creating the routes. I have an advantage. I'm the town administrator in Hopkinton, so I have access to good maps and addresses and things like that. So that helped create the routes. We've changed them a couple of times, like 3 times, but try to keep basically the same flag routes through the years. We try to keep routes under an hour, most are 30 to 45 minutes to put out. We do, as we get to it, you'll see we put out the ground stakes and leave them up all summer from the Memorial Day to Veterans Day. We leave them out. We do take them in the winter. So it takes a little longer to put them out in the beginning and not too much longer to pick them up in November unless they're really frozen in. This year we were fine. We keep people ask, how do you track all this? It's just a simple Excel spreadsheet. Let's see. Luckily, one of our members had a barn, which is where we stored them to begin with, and put them out. And a couple of the groups keep their flags in his barn, but most people now keep them at home. They keep the same flags. They track them, which works pretty well. This is in the barn. The year we pulled them in and redid them all, so there were lots of them ready to go. We did repaint some of the poles and things, so those are all ready for the season beginning. We largely place the flags by the mailbox unless there's a request to put them somewhere else. This picture, actually, you're looking down, this is in front of a plaza we have in town. They actually have 5 flags that we space at. I think you only see 4 here. There's one behind the picture taker. So they're spaced out there. But most people do 1 flag, a few do more. The cost of flags are the poles themselves are $12.50. The ground spikes, and I'll show you pictures of all these, are $7.95. The flags are $4, and shipping largely of the ground stakes, because of the weight, is $8. We found flags seem to last about 5 years, poles and spikes longer, although every year we lose spikes where people drive into them or the mower hits them or something. This is what we've used, a $4 waterproof Dura flag. We've tried different ones, and this seems to last the best and looks the best. It's fairly lightweight, so it blows in the wind and looks great. The poles are just 10-foot white aluminum poles. These happen to come with ground stakes, but we use these ground stakes. After the first year, when we pounded in the ones that sink way into the ground, we went back and couldn't find them all, and it was hard to do. We switched to these spikes, and they seem to work the best. And as I said, we leave them up for the entire season, but take them down for the winter. This is what a flag put together looks like, one of the new ones. The flag has to be added on, and we use just zip ties to help hold them both at the top and the bottom. And there's a spike. This is kind of a weird picture. And just to get a sense of how long the spikes are, and they go into the ground, and they go in pretty easily most of the time, although some days you hit every single rock there is. We're not the granite state for no reason. The club next door, the Henniker Rotary Club, started doing this, and they added these signs. They had somebody who makes signs in their club, which I thought was a really good idea. So I've been sharing that with people. We haven't done that, and really hadn't found a good way to sort of signify as they were out there where they were from. But this seems to work. So they zip tie these right onto the flags. Kind of getting word out, word of mouth has been our largest way to let people know. If a neighborhood all of a sudden has quite a few flags, then everybody seems to want to have them. So it's gone a little bit by neighborhood. We have set up a table at elections to do that. We've used the Rotary Facebook page and other Facebook pages that we have within town. Our yearly billing, we send a letter each year with our billing asking if people wanted to be in there. We did for 2015 do a townwide mailing, a little larger, well, 6.5 by 11 postcard. This was the front, just sort of, this is how we got to the 250. And the back talked about, I see Carl taking pictures. I hope I'm not moving too fast. I can send you the presentation too, if that's helpful. And this went to everyone in town to how to sign up. Now, since then, we do have a Hopkinton Rotary flag Gmail account, so they can do that too. Lots of times people will call, we'll put up the flag, and we just have them send the check. That's worked very well. Things to think about if you're thinking of doing it. Do you have enough people to do the routes? Someone willing to create the routes? That's probably the hardest part. Once it's done, it's good. We buy our flags from flag importers. They are not made in the United States. That's something you may want to consider. We've looked at different alternatives, and that's still an ongoing discussion for us. But the clubs that have started doing it have all bought them from the same place we do. And one of the questions we always have is we do put the flags out and leave them out for 4, 5, 6 days. Should they be lit at night? They are not. The great thing this year is even during COVID, we could do this. We do have people that go out in pairs. I happen to go out with somebody else. So we went out and did this with our car windows open and masks on. We had 444 flags at $40 is almost 18,000. Our expenses, which was the mailing of bills, buying new flags, and we added 80, a little over 80 this year. So we had to buy those and replacement flags. We spent about $4,600. So our profit was $13,000. That can vary depending on how many we're replacing each year. But largely, probably my goal is to have 500 flags. And if we do end up at some point going to the $50, that's $25,000 in $5,000 a year in replacements, which is probably a high estimate. So it's a $20,000 fundraiser. So that's that. And for us, that makes it, well, the 13,000, we have a yearly golf tournament, which does our scholarship fund, which is somewhere between 10 and 14, although it's been running a little lower than that lately. So this has been good to help us make up the difference there. And that really is it in a nutshell. The other thing, it has been amazing PR for us. It makes the Rotary Club visible, and that has been a real plus, because people know it's Rotary, Hopkinton Rotary, that does the flags, and we're on every street, and they see us out putting them up, and so that's been very positive too. So it's really been a kind of a win-win situation all the way around.
Neil, could you talk a little bit about how many members you have, the average age, and I might say what's the oldest members that are with this? Because it's we do Christmas trees, and putting those up on cars can be a struggle. So what's that capacity?
Sure. I think on the books we have about 40 members. And as I said, we get around 20 at a meeting right now. It was a little bit better, certainly when we were in person. We do have the 22, actually, I think we have 21 people doing the routes. One person has 2 routes. I would say probably mid 70s and down are the ages of the people who are doing this. Some of the other people chose not to. And I would guess our demographics are pretty much like yours and probably most clubs. I'm probably on the younger side, in my mid 50s for our club. And we probably have, I'd say, 10 members at the most under 60. And then we go up from there.
Mm-hmm. So what do we have for questions, folks? I have several that I can ask, but what do you have for questions?
I would just add probably Henniker next door did it for the first time this year, and they decided to do 150 flags to start with, and they sold out fairly quickly.
How big is Henniker? Do you know?
Henniker is, I think it's 4,500 people. They're a little smaller than we are. Hopkinton has 5,700 people in town.
Dart, I thought you had a question.
That
No?
was my question.
Jimmy?
Yeah, do you lose any by theft?
We have not. We lose some by them being run into or bent or something. There are some damage. We had a windstorm come through that actually took a couple of them and bent them pretty badly. But to the best of my knowledge, we've had none that have been stolen.
Thank you.
Tom, I see you had a question.
Yes, would you please just, if you could, off your top of your head, what was the cost of your flag? You had that went by fast, and I missed it.
It's just over $32 with shipping and everything. That's everything.
I've just done a quick Google and looking for American made, and the lowest I can see is $19 for the $20 for the flag alone.
And the flags we get are $4. There are cheaper flags, but I think they are cheaper, way too cheaper in quality. So that's why we ended up where we are.
In the budget I did last year, Tom, I tried to, I'm not sure you were here yet, but I tried to accrue over 5 years the cost versus one time, because you can get lost in when you've got something that's more useful. I hadn't thought that the poles and the spikes, of course, many more years than that. I know you sell some via gifts at Christmas and so forth. Any idea on the general statistics on gifts? How many people drop off each year and how many come on, those kind of stats?
Sure. I would guess we lose maybe 10 a year. A few people drop it and have decided they didn't want to do it. I would say after the 250th that year, we lost more. I think people wanted it specifically for that. But generally, we don't lose too many people who haven't moved. There are people who move and things like that. And the other,
And the gifts?
Gifts, we have not pushed that. So we probably do about a dozen gifts a year. We have a few that we give as part of raffles for other nonprofit. The Women's Club has a sale each year and gives 2 subscriptions like that. So we do a few of those.
And I know the events we have, I'm looking for hands. Events we have, they're usually partially tied to something core, like our Christmas trees is about scholarships. Our disc golf is about also about the disc golf course. And the golf tournament is a combination partnership of a hospital, our scholarship, and gift giving. Do you peg the proceeds to a particular use when you market it?
We haven't really with our marketing, other than our projects. It has helped to supplement our golf tournament to keep our scholarship level at the same level it's been at. And the other big thing that it's going towards is we're partnering with the local Lions Club to build a pavilion at one of the picnic areas where we have some rustic cabins. So that's something I think we need to do. We need to, like the golf tournament always goes to scholarships. We haven't tied this to that, and I think that would be helpful and something we should be doing.
We had thought about partial proceeds going to our local Wounded Warriors event, but those are just ideas. Marty, you have a question?
Yes, Neil. You're the town administrator as well, did you say?
I am. That's my real job.
Well, congratulations on that. Neil, does the town put up its own flags? You know, in Brattleboro and Newfane or surrounding, the towns put up flags. Do you have that in Hopkinton as well?
Not on a large scale. We have in downtown Contoocook, which is part of Hopkinton, we have Fountain Square, and the town does put flags up around that and has flags at all the buildings, but we don't like have flags on the telephone poles or anything like that. That had never been a tradition here.
Neil, can I ask you, do you do anything in your marketing of the program that tries to address how the flag has become a sort of a sensitive symbol in the past few years? I mean, you started this back in 2012, and I feel like it's become more and more a sensitive symbol, even though it really could and should be such a symbol of unity. Do you try to address that at all in your marketing?
We haven't, and have never had any sort of feedback about that. And I'm wondering if partially that's because we had been doing it prior to sort of the changes in some of the feelings. So it's been an ongoing thing. And we start on Memorial Day. And so we have not really heard, really all the feedback has been very positive about how nice they look when you drive down the roads and see them on so many houses. Fortunately, we haven't had that. So I don't know if starting a program new, that would be something to consider more.
Can I ask, what is the diversity of your club? I mean, of your locale?
Our locale, it's not very diverse at all. It's a pretty white middle class community. I would say upper middle class at that.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Neil, that was a great
Question,
program.
Carl.
What? Yes.
Where it looked like you put them all on the edge of the road? Do you put them closer towards the houses, or do people come out and say, I want it over here? How does that get decided?
So for the most part, they go right by the mailbox.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But we do, as people are signing up, have a place for them to list, oh, I want it here. I want it on the right side of my driveway, or so there are places, but unless we have other instruction, it goes right by the mailbox.
Okay. Okay.
So another question for you. We have several fundraisers. We had some that don't work out over time, some that expire. Christmas trees, we used to sell 900, now we sell maybe 400, and it seems to stabilize. But yet all of these are time consuming. And you sound like you've got the golf tournament and the flag project, which are two solid events. Do you have other significant events? We have car show, we have the Christmas trees, we've tried pies, and this takes up 5 weekends. How many projects like this do you have, or is it just those two?
We do, when we're able, run a hill climb bike race, which is a fundraiser. That's generally one Saturday in August or September. I'm trying to think what else.
What's the name of that?
It's the Mount Kearsarge Hill Climb.
Oh, yeah.
So
how much do you raise with that?
I would say it's $2,000 or $3,000. If we're lucky. I think it's more of a passion for the member who does it, because he does other hill climbs than a huge fundraiser. And other than that, we do different things at different times, but no other, I would say, big things. We've got big fundraisers.
One of the reasons continue to pursue this is that the president-elect a year ago, February meeting, everyone sat up and talked about things. Our disc golf, which Rob was a key man on, was of great interest. And then someone from your club I think, stood up and was really enthusiastic about this, as they should be with the numbers. And it's hard to find these things that are unique in a community. Even in studying this, if our club doesn't pick up on it, I've got an idea of who might pick up on it. So maybe as we near 1 o'clock, we're not too close. There's plenty of time for more questions if others have questions. Maura.
There we go. So what about sponsorship? So for instance, like the town does a certain amount of things, but there are other places in the town where, for instance, there's a volunteer who does planters everywhere. So if someone like me who has my own flag and I live on a really rural area, pending town permission or something, that I could say, I'll sponsor 4 flags at the covered bridge. Like, do you do things like that? Do you sell off like things like that so somebody could just sponsor something?
Yes, that's a good thing to add. For example, we have several members who don't live in the community. They're further away, and they sponsor. I think we have 8 that go up at this the Rotary Civil War Memorial Park. So there's 8 there. So they sponsor those, and we have a resident who sponsors one that goes up at the library. And I actually put them up at the town hall. Those are the ones I put up. I sponsor. So yes, we do. That's a good thing to add to that, to my presentation too. But people seem to enjoy that. If they don't want it necessarily in their yard, they sponsor it in a more public place.
Okay, so I think the next thing I'd like we have some time. I would like some input from people as to our next step. I don't think we're ready to do a vote on this, but I think a committee that would just put a basic plan together. I think we've researched it as much as you can. Neil's done a tremendous job of giving us the facts. I don't think we need a 3-4 page business plan. I think it is interesting. It started with 76. I would think it was less, but I did call a couple of towns where I finally ran into Neil. So it might have been one of the other smaller towns. So I think that I'd like some feedback from the club on, Neil, with our club, we've got a number of things that go on during the year. That being said, this can start at a slow pace, and it might be, if it was taking off, that we would drop some things or not. Depends on how people feel about it. Club members, have you got any input on the next steps that you'd like to hear? Or do you think you've heard enough that you would like to be supportive of it? I would caution people who feel that they couldn't help, whether it was physically or morally, unless they're against the club doing it. But I think we need to hear from people who think that they can help and make it happen to get it going. We'll take a core group for sure. And Neil's shown what can be done. He's worked it for 5 years and seems to enjoy it, if I get the sense. Tom? Mute, you're on mute.
Thank you. Another question for Neil, if you would. Neil, on the routing, have you tried using the Google, the free Google routing things, or any of those other tools? Have any of those been a good hint and helpful?
I haven't. The first year when I put together the routes, I used one of those to get directions, and that was crazy. So to go from one place to the other. So we just do a list of street addresses. It's interesting. Maybe I should run them through that and see what they came up with. I
used one a while ago for some work projects. It was interesting. I hope they've improved substantially in the last 5 years, but I don't know. Thank you.
And my big advantage is I do have access to the 911 maps, which lists all the addresses, and all the roots to plant, which is a huge help in planning how to put them together.
Okay, Neil, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to take this up at the board meeting next week. And a great presentation, did a great job. You guys have found a great fundraiser. You've given us all the details, and I'm sure I'll be in touch. There'll be a question here and there. And from here, we'll sign off, and thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Feel free to contact with any questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
So it has been a strange year for all of us, obviously. I entered my quarantine summer, continuing with my bird photography. Some photos are shown here, but I spent a lot more time outdoors and ran into a lot of cool stuff. Some of the things are, I was walking along a field in Windsor and looked across this field of wildflowers and fireweed, and was very surprised, as I think he was equally surprised to see this eastern coyote sitting there, and he sat for a minute to get his portrait taken. I saw this black bear quite a few times in Montague this summer. Much more special and cool for me, although a lot of people don't like snakes, so not for everyone. I ran into this copperhead. I think there are something on the order of a couple of dozen copperheads in the entire state of Massachusetts. So to be walking along an abandoned road and see this guy slithering across the road in front of me was pretty amazing. And I didn't get too close. That's what telephoto lenses are for. With Sydney Bettner, who's a guest now, I saw a couple of eastern box turtles. Here's one of them. Their shells are just incredible. You can see why they were used by Native Americans for design motifs. And I also saw, but didn't photograph, this on the upper right is not my photograph, an eastern hognose snake. It's an interesting snake, which if it feels threatened, the first thing it does is rise up in the air and hiss. The next thing it does is regurgitate some very smelly stuff. And the third thing it does is roll over and play dead. So its bark is far worse than its bite. And on the lower right, an eastern rat snake. This was a big one, about 6 feet long. It had just eaten, so I did not, so it was not very quick in moving away. But I wanted to share with you today some photos and information about the order of Lepidoptera in the class of insects. And we're talking moths and butterflies. There's not nearly enough time to cover a lot of things that I should cover, but just to start, I will say that butterflies evolved from moths in a mutualistic relationship with flowering plants. So butterflies and moths need very specific plants to serve as their larval hosts, because the butterfly and moth larvae can only feed on certain species of plant. Likewise, the flowering plants need butterflies, moths, and other insects to serve as pollinators. We have to be aware that non-native plants can become invasive and cause the displacement of native plants, which in turn results in crashes in insect populations. The consequences of which, and we've all heard quite a lot about this, for the global ecosystem are pretty dire. So I encourage everyone, if you're a gardener, plant native stuff. So I'm going to start also with the concept of mimicry. You may remember from your high school biology the concept of Batesian mimicry. And that is when a species which is harmless mimics another species which is either dangerous or harmful to as a means of protection. So here we have a butterfly, and I didn't take these photos because this butterfly is only very, very rarely seen where we are, but it's the Pipevine swallowtail. And the larvae of the Pipevine swallowtail feed on plants like the pipevine. The pipevine, it has acids in it, which are passed on to the caterpillars when they eat them. And then these acids are in turn actually passed along to the adults and then to future eggs and future butterflies, and the levels build up. And the acids are unpalatable to predators, birds, and probably lizards, and perhaps some small mammals as well, if they could catch them. And so what are the markings? So they've learned to avoid them. And how do they do that? Well, on the dorsal side of the Pipevine swallowtail, we see this iridescent blue. And on the underside, we see orange and white and yellow spots. So we have butterflies that mimic the pipevine. One of them is the Spicebush Swallowtail. And if we look at it, we see on top and on the rear of the dorsal side of the hind wing, we have iridescent blue. And on the underside of the hind wing, we have orange and white and yellow spots. The Spicebush Swallowtail butterfly is a mimic, but the larvae are mimics too. And they are, oddly enough, snake mimics. So on the right, we've got a fully grown caterpillar, which, and it has these markings here, which are not in fact eyes, but they mimic the eyes of a snake. And on the left, we have an earlier instar, so-called, an earlier generation of caterpillar, and it's sticking out its tongue. Well, it's not a tongue, it's an osmeterium, but it's forked like a snake's tongue. And so when threatened, one of these caterpillars will actually rear up, flick out its, evert its osmeterium, and mimic a snake. And it also emits a smell, which is unpleasant to birds, although not so much to people. And another little note in terms of mimicry, the earlier forms of the caterpillar are bird-dropping mimics, which is actually pretty common in the world of moths. Another thing to note here on the right, you can see this caterpillar sitting on the leaf of a sassafras. So Stacy and I planted sassafras in our backyard this spring. The next thing we knew in the summer, we had two Lepidoptera species for which the sassafras is a host. One was the Spicebush Swallowtail, and we also had a moth, which we'll get to later on, the Prometheus moth. But this white sticky stuff here is sort of a silk-like substance that the caterpillar gives off, and it rolls the leaf around it during the day for protection against predators. And at night, it comes out to feed. So a lot of adaptations there for protection, which are pretty interesting and pretty cool. All right, so here's a different species of swallowtail. And by the way, all of our swallowtails in this genus, Papilio, they all of their larvae form do snake mimicry. So here's a black swallowtail, and lo and behold, on the top are iridescent blue. And on the bottom, we've got yellow and orange spots. And this mimicry extends even to butterflies which are not in the same family as swallowtails. So this is the southern subspecies of the red-spotted Admiral. And we look at it, and sure enough, it's iridescent blue on top and has orange spots on the ventral side of the hind wing. Also, you'll notice, what's it sitting here on the right? It's actually sitting on some animal scat that was sitting in the path, in the wooded path. And what it's doing, you can see its tongue extended into that. And what it's doing is it's sucking up minerals. And So the males will sit on animal dung or mud puddles or even sand, wet sand, to soak up minerals which it needs for reproduction. And the nectar that it sips from flowers is not a source for this stuff, so it needs to get it somehow, and that's how they do it. So there's also a northern subspecies of the red-spotted admiral called the white admiral. And interestingly enough, it doesn't, although it shares a lot of features of the red-spotted admiral, of the southern form, it has these big white bands both on the dorsal and ventral sides. And so it looks really quite a bit less like a pipevine swallowtail than the southern subspecies. And the reason for this is the pipevine swallowtail range doesn't extend very far north in New England. In fact, we're, in terms of the division between the northern and the southern subspecies of the admirals, it's pretty much right where we are, northern Massachusetts, southern Vermont. And occasionally I've seen hybrids between these two. And once again, you can see that this guy is pulling up his minerals from the ground. And the other thing to notice here, so this butterfly belongs to a group called the brushfoots. It's a family of butterflies. And if you look at it carefully and think, well, this is an insect, but really there's only 2 legs here and one here and one here. That's only 4 legs. But insects have 6. In the brush-footed butterflies, the 4 legs are actually folded up against the body. They're pretty much vestigial. And so they give that appearance of having 4 legs. And here's another swallowtail. We're all probably pretty familiar with it, the tiger swallowtail. We actually have 2 species here. Early in the year, we see mostly Canadian swallowtail, which is shown on the right. And later on, eastern swallowtail. They also hybridize, and they look pretty similar. But on the left, we've got an eastern tiger swallowtail nectaring on echinacea right in our front yard. And there's the giant swallowtail. Now, the giant swallowtail is a little bit less common, although sometimes you run into whole groups of them as they are emerging. But once after they've emerged, they disperse pretty widely. But Stacy and I went up to West Haven, Vermont, which is an interesting part of the world. It was right at the mouth of the Pulteney River. Much easier to get to from New York over this little bridge over the Pulteney River, as opposed to Vermont, where it's a long stretch of dirt road to get there. And these insects never alit. They were always fluttering, so they were hard to photograph. And they are nectaring on bergamot, which is a monarda. So monarda is bee balm. Bee balm is a cultivar of Monarda fistulosa. And boy, is it popular for pollinators. A lot of moths and butterflies get their nectar from this particular plant. So now we're going to move to some moths, but these are daytime moths, not nighttime moths. And the first one, we have 3 species of this genus, the genus Hemaris, and this is the slender clearwing. And if you look at the photo, you can see why it's called a clearwing, with the shadow, with the sun shining through the clear portion of the wing onto this oak leaf. And I took this in the Montague Sand Plain, which was filled with wild blueberry, and the larvae are blueberry obligates. That's where they're found. And so it looks a lot like the hummingbird clearwing, which is Hemaris thysbe. And this is a hummingbird mimic. And you could see why a moth would want to imitate a hummingbird, because there are predators, birds mostly, that would eat a moth, but not so much a hummingbird. Although it praying mantises, especially the European praying mantis, which is the one we mostly see, they will actually they're capable of catching a hummingbird, but that was an aside. So this butterfly can move up, down, sideways, frontwards, backwards, just like a hummingbird moves. It flaps its wings incredibly fast. These photos were taken at 1/2500th of a second, and I still couldn't freeze the motion. And you can see the moth and butterfly tongues are an amazing organ. Here it is sticking into the floret of the monarda of the bergamot, and here it is sort of curled, ready to be retracted. 2 more images of the same species. And then we have the Snowberry Clearwing. So on the left, on the upper portion, we have a Hummingbird Clearwing, and down below, we have a Snowberry Clearwing. And it's a bumblebee mimic. Again, you could see the advantage of being a bumblebee mimic because moths don't bite, but bumblebees sting. 2 more photos of that species. So it was a really spectacular little patch of monarda there. It had these guys, and it had the black swallowtails all together. So here's another group of butterflies. These are the hairstreaks. There are, I think, around 15 species of hairstreaks in New England, and I only found 4 this summer. One interesting thing about them is if you look at the rear portion of the hind wing, there's a little appendage which comes off the rear of the hind wing, which looks a lot like an antenna. And they also have a dot right here, a marking, which looks a lot like an eye. So here we could say that this is a butterfly mimicking itself. If a bird predator tries to grab it by its head, it stands a pretty good chance of grabbing the rear of the hairstreak, allowing the actual butterfly to escape, to live another day, albeit with a piece of wing missing. So on the left, we have the banded hairstreak. On the right, the really spectacular coral hairstreak. On the left, a juniper hairstreak, which was also found in West Haven. Here it is sitting on some Queen Anne's lace, I think. And a gray hairstreak sitting on some plantain. And there you can really see the eyes and the tail, the hind wing appendages. These are all pretty tiny butterflies, not too much bigger than your thumbnail, actually. So then we have blues and azures. This is an eastern-tailed blue. These are also pretty small guys. And they start coming out pretty early. And the eastern-tailed blue shares the same adaptation for defense as the hairstreaks. You can see the little tail sticking out of its hind wing and the eye dots. One of the really beautiful blues is the silvery blue. So these butterflies generally, when they're sitting, have their wings folded up. So all you can see is the ventral view, which is not that spectacular. But when it's cold, they like to open their wings and they'll spin around to maximize the solar exposure on their wings. And then you can really get a good view of the top of their wings. Here's another one. This is the Carner blue. This is pretty interesting because this subspecies was discovered by the Russian novelist Vladimir Nabokov, who lived in New York. And in one of his travels to upstate New York, in Carner, which is outside of Albany, he first discovered and described this subspecies. It is endangered. In fact, it's really only found in isolated patches around the Great Lakes and in the Albany pine bush, which is an extensive sand barren in Albany, New York. And there has been, and I don't know the status of it, an introduction attempt into southern New Hampshire, whether that's out towards the coast or in the Keene area, I'm not sure. But they're associated with pine barrens, especially where lupin is found. And you can see that this, on the left, the photo is sitting on some lupin. Anglewings. So when Stacy and I went up to West Haven, we were looking for anglewings, which we didn't find. But we did see some over in Windsor. And anglewings are all wing angles. You can see that. They're all scalloped and all kinds of different angles. And when their wings are folded, such as the one on the left, they are leaf mimics. This one's also sitting on some scat in the middle of the path. And this is the gray comma, so called because if you look on the underside of the wing right there, there is a white mark that looks like a comma. And here we have a question mark, which is closely related. The one on the right was taken on Mount Greylock in more or less early May. There were very few flowers out for it to nectar on. So under those circumstances, anglewings like sap. It's probably feeding on sap from this birch tree. And on the left, you can see it with its wings folded. And there is a marking here, which looks a bit like a question mark. We can also see that this is a brush-footed butterfly, 4 legs, visible. All right, so some more moths. We saw some daytime nectaring moths and those hummingbird moths. But here we have some nighttime nectaring moths. They are nectaring on, lo and behold, bergamot. And on the left, we have the master's dart moth. Dart moths are actually usually cutworms, so they're much more, much sexier as moths than they are as caterpillars. And on the right, the asteroid moth, which is kind of a cool name. I think that moth and butterfly entomologists have a great sense of humor because there's a lot of funny names for them. For instance, there's a Batman moth. All right, so moving along, silkworm moths. So these are the Saturnidae. And this is actually the biggest family of moths in the world. There are well over 2,000 species worldwide. We have quite a few, and they tend to be pretty big. And also some of them are just spectacular. We tend to think of moths as being drab, and some of them are, but some of them are spectacularly colored. And I didn't show any skippers in this presentation. Skippers are very small butterflies that are much drabber than most moths. So in fact, when people see them, they tend to think they're moths. So the rule that butterflies are colored and moths are not is true sometimes, but only sometimes. So this is the Eo moth. And on the left, we have one at night sitting with its forewings folded over the hind wing. And it's colorful, but not really that great. But when the forewings are positioned so that the hind wing is exposed, they're incredibly spectacular. Now, I did not take this photo on the right. I didn't actually get a good photo of an open-winged Eo moth, although I saw a couple this past summer. Not all of them are all this red. They probably tend more commonly kind of more this golden yellow color, but they have these great, incredible markings. And this is the Prometheus silkworm moth. These are pretty big. They're probably 5 inches overall, their wingspan. So I had mentioned that Stacy and I put some sassafras in, and we found the Spicebush Swallowtail caterpillars in it. And we also found Prometheus caterpillars in it. And we also found right on the fence in our backyard, this Prometheus silkworm moth. So it just goes to show that when you plant a native species, you know, the results can be almost instantaneous in terms of getting seeing caterpillars that are that you wouldn't see otherwise, and in general improving the diversity of your yard. And this is actually my last slide. These are two more colorful silkworm moths. The one on the left is a fairly small silkworm moth called the rosy maple moth. And this particular one I saw in the basement. I had left the bulkhead door open and there was a light on in the basement. And I came down the next morning and there was this rosy maple moth. And on the right, and again, this is not my photo, Luna moth. Probably most of us remember from when we were kids seeing Luna moths on the screen doors of our porches. Not so much anymore. One of the big threats to moths in general, and especially to these guys, is lights. So these big, very bright sodium mercury vapor lights. Their spectrum is very attracting to these moths, and they will just spend a lot of time flying around the moths, flying around the lights, and not finding each other to reproduce. I think, you know, the males of these species give off pheromones that the females can pick up miles and miles away. I mean, I think up to 5 miles away. But that reproductive strategy is interfered with by lights. So that concludes the presentation. So there's plenty of time for questions if you have them. Let me get my Zoom back on here if I can figure it out. That's not it. I have to I'm going to stop sharing. There we go. So there we go.
Great program.
There was, you know, so much more I could have covered, but that is, you know, for another day.
Very interesting. Do we have questions? Frank?
Thank you, Jeremy. That was really interesting. In the garden, you mentioned one caterpillar that emerged into a moth. What about the tomato hornworm? Does that monster turn into a moth or a butterfly?
Yes, it does. So there's two